Counting calories, is it helpful for some people and can it be harmful to others? Thanks for joining. I am a functional medicine practitioner. I'm also a mental health scientist. You can check out my work. I'm the founder of the Wise Mind Nutrition app. I did my training at UCLA, the founder of Nutrition and Recovery, a private practice here in Los Angeles. There's me in the bottom right corner. That's 1991. The first question, we're going to start with basics and definition. We're going to get into much more complex stuff. Most people know that a calorie is an energy unit needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So there was these old school calorimeters, literally would put food in there and combust it and see what was needed to raise the temperature. We have much more sophisticated machinery now. They're actually kilocalories, and we call them calories for ease, but technically it's a kilocalorie. This is potential energy that food provides to our body, and it fuels a wide range of physiological functions, physical activity, cellular processes, and can be stored. Calories in, calories out has been a model that has had a lot of history, and it comes with a lot of assumptions. The first assumption is that all calories consumed are metabolized similarly across individuals, and that body weight simply results from energy intake versus energy expenditure. And it's been proposed that the calorie model, CAICO, calories in, calories out, is oversimplified. It's a myth. We know that not all calories are equal. I'm going to talk about that today. Counting methods are inaccurate. We've got hormones and metabolism and gut microbiome. We've got neuroscience and addiction like eating. And so there's a lot of parts of this scientific picture that challenge the simplistic calorie model. Calories do tend to ignore digestion, absorption, gut microbial metabolism, especially how energy can be harvested from food. These numbers are pretty widely known. Most people know that a gram of carbs is 4 kilocalories. Carbohydrates are also dependent on the breakdown through salivary amylase, pancreatic amylase. The fiber question remains very vague in terms of how much calories fiber contains, because these are harvested in the colon by bacteria. Protein's also 4 kilocalories, and this is broken down by various proteases in the stomach and small intestine. Fat is 9 kilocalories, mostly broken down in the small intestine. These are all dependent on enzyme activity. So you start to wonder, what if someone has some pancreatic enzyme deficiencies? I'm going to start with the more obvious medical conditions that challenge the calorie model. In certain GI tract disorders like celiac, Crohn's, IBS, you have malabsorption. If the small intestine is inflamed or damaged, this can reduce carbohydrate-derived energy. Protein can be absorbed less if the surface area is impairing amino acid absorption. This reduces availability of amino acids. Fat malabsorption is also common in GI disorders, especially if the bile acid recycling is impaired. So people that have these disorders often tend to lose weight, even if they're eating adequate food. And this is just one easy example of how caloric intake from food can overestimate what's actually absorbed. Pancreatic disorders are also noteworthy. Pancreatic lipase is crucial for fat digestion. So if someone has issues here, fat absorption and calorie availability drops sharply. Both carbohydrates and protein are broken down by enzymes. These can be impaired in pancreatic disorders, but to a lesser extent. So without proper enzyme therapy, fats provide fewer than 9 kilocalories. These are obvious examples of where the calorie model is incomplete. There's also mitochondrial dysfunction, which reduces ATP production. Fewer calories are efficiently converted into usable energy. We have increased reactive oxygen species. This is known as oxidative stress. It impairs cellular function, and metabolic inflexity, where healthy mitochondria is able to switch between burning carbs and fat. Dysfunctional mitochondria may really struggle with fat oxidation. Mitochondrial dysfunction is associated with burning fewer calories at rest, even if the calorie intake and physical activity match someone else's. So of course, calorie qualities matter. Certain ultra-processed foods that are high in sugar and inflammatory oils can impair mitochondrial function over time. So two diets with the same calories but different nutrient profiles can lead to very different metabolic outcomes. And of course, we're going to talk about mental health today. The mitochondrial is critical in neuronal energy metabolism. When someone has mitochondrial dysfunction, it's been associated with depression, bipolar, fatigue, schizoaffective disorders. So when mental illness impacts mitochondrial function, it can further distort energy metabolism. And again, these are all examples of situations that are not adequately captured by calories in, calories out. And I think the big one that got my attention goes all the way back to 2006. I remember being new to the field and learning about gut bacteria. And this research has been replicated, but I wanted to cite one of the original big studies. It showed that when mice were colonized with bacteria from larger bodied humans and larger bodied rodents, they would gain more fat than those that were colonized with bacteria from the lean donors, despite consuming the same amount of food. So the gut bacteria conversation really challenged the calorie model. It showed that you could do fecal transplants and people would change their weight on the same amount of calories. There's more genes for carbohydrate and lipid metabolism, which means that certain bacteria can become better at extracting energy from complex substrates. So we have examples of organ system issues that can lead to less calorie utilization. And we have this gut bacteria conversation that lends itself to a higher extraction of energy. This really blew my mind and the mind of other people, challenged us to start thinking more about gut health, mitochondrial health, organ systems, rather than just calories. The gut microbiota consists of trillions of microbes, mostly in the colon, and these ferment indigestible carbohydrates like fibers and resistant starch, convert them into short-chain fatty acids. Maybe you've heard of butyrate. It's getting a lot of attention in functional medicine. These short-chain fatty acids are absorbed by the host and they contribute measurable calories. These aren't easily integrated into calorie models. So the difference in gut bacteria, short-chain fatty acid production, etc., these can all have implications. Some microbes can enhance the extraction of calories from otherwise poorly digestible substrates, essentially making food more caloric. Calories don't account for the fiber content. Some are fermented by gut microbes like soluble fibers, some are not. Doesn't account for antioxidant activity. We'll talk a little bit today about polyphenols and how this is an important family of phytonutrients that are not captured by simple calorie models. The food matrix, how the structure of food can affect digestion. But there's also digestibility of different proteins, fats, and starches. And I think the big piece that a lot of people are learning is that these nutrition facts labels have huge error margins. There's been studies to suggest that the labels can be off by about 20%. We also have something called the thermic effect of food. Protein has a higher cost of digestion. So when people eat more protein, the body utilizes more calories to break that down. So 100 calories of protein doesn't necessarily net 100 calories. It could be 70 to 80, depending on the individual and the context. Calories in is murky. Calories out is also a moving target. Basal metabolic rate varies by age, sex, genetics, muscle mass, hormones, sleep, inflammation. There's also something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. I'm super excited right now, so I'm moving my body. I tend to sway when I get excited. And these are all forms of energy expenditure that are not easily captured by things like MyFitnessPal. We know that exercise calories are notoriously hard to measure, and certain research suggests that fitness trackers can be off by 20 to 80%. We also know that food preparation affects energy availability. When food is cooked, ground, or processed, it's much easier to digest, and that increases energy absorption. The example is that raw almonds provide less energy than roasted almond butter. And it makes sense because the almond butter has in some ways been pre-digested. It's readily available calories for the body, but these are not things that are reflected on food labels. This is often referred to as bioaccessibility. And what about the brain? This is where it gets interesting. Brain regulates metabolism based on context. If there's stress, trauma, other mental health challenges, sleep, circadian rhythms, these all affect appetite, hormones such as leptin, ghrelin, and cortisol, and the resting metabolic rate. So two people can eat and move the same, but burn different amounts of energy due to stress or hormonal shifts. These are all factors that are not captured by calorie models. So mental health challenges calories in, calories out. The Kaiko model treats the human body like a closed mechanical system, ignoring complex neurobiological, hormonal, and emotional factors that govern appetite, cravings, metabolism, and behavior. In reality, the brain, especially in the context of mental health, is a powerful regulator of energy intake and expenditure. So a lot of my work in recent years has been emphasizing the link between nutrition and the brain, nutrition and the mind. And it really gets interesting when you look at hormones like ghrelin, leptin, insulin, neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, to think about how mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, or binge eating disrupt these hunger, satiety, regulation signals. Depression is often associated with overeating or emotional eating, or even under eating, a lack of appetite. ADHD can impair impulse control and lead to erratic eating. Some of the medications can also lead to appetite dysregulation. PTSD and trauma can affect the HPA axis and promote stress eating. So if the brain's reward system is dysregulated, food intake is no longer governed by metabolic need. It's driven by emotional or neurological signals. We know that chronic physiological stress increases cortisol. This can promote fat storage, increase insulin resistance, and trigger cravings for higher calorie comfort foods. The inflammation that's driven by chronic stress affects the mitochondrial efficiency, potentially reducing energy expenditure even if someone's at rest. So stress doesn't just make people eat more, it alters how energy is stored and used, breaking the simple eat less, move more logic. What about psych meds? Antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers we know can affect appetite. They can also reduce basal metabolic rate. The area that I've been most interested in is how medications can create imbalances in gut bacteria or dysbiosis. There's quite a bit of research from Ireland that shows a lot of medications lead to reductions in bacterial diversity. There's also a suggestion that some of these meds can alter fat partitioning. These changes are biological, not behavioral, and can occur independently of caloric intake. So if medications change energy expenditure or appetite through microbial or neurochemical mechanisms, weight changes are not just about calories or willpower. What about ultra-processed foods? We know that the dopamine system can be hijacked by certain types of foods, similar to addictive substances. This can lead to loss of control, binge episodes, compulsive eating, especially in those that have underlying mental health vulnerabilities. Calorie counting is ineffective in this context because behavioral control is compromised by neurobiology, and food companies know this. They know that food has a profound effect on reward systems. And they've been very effective in getting us to focus on calories rather than things like dopamine. So if the brain's reward system determines how food is perceived, sought, and consumed, and it's dysregulated, calories in becomes nonlinear and biologically biased. The calories in, calories out model is highly reductionist. It ignores how mental health, microbes, stress, neurotransmitters, medications, and reward circuitry shape the appetite, the metabolism, and energy balance. Mental health isn't separate from metabolism. It is metabolism. Maybe you've heard about metabolic psychiatry or nutritional psychiatry. These are growing fields that are starting to question old paradigms and to start to think about new ones. So what are some new paradigms? Nutrition for mental health has been my passion project. I've been very focused on advancing this field, and I've started by identifying three major areas. The first is obvious. These are nutrients that support brain health. You think about omega-3 fatty acids that are part of cell membranes. These are in the brain and affect how parts of the brain communicate with each other. This is known as neurotransmission. There's also a lot of B vitamins and more indirect pathways with minerals, things like magnesium. I think it's probably safe to say that most of the nutrients people are familiar with have implications for brain health, some more so than others. The second area is eating to improve gut health. You've probably heard the term second brain describing this bidirectional gut-brain axis. I think there is a trend of people getting past the calorie model and starting to think more about the gut health model. What I put in my body has implications for my different body systems. Therefore, calories do not capture all that needs to be known. And of course, my deep passion is not just the biology, but how we think about food and body, how we talk about it with our peers and with our family and with ourselves. This is known as nutritional psychology. It thinks about stress, trauma, and adversity, body dissatisfaction. It's a really exciting multidisciplinary biopsychosocial approach, combines nutritional, neurological, gastrointestinal, behavioral, and psychological sciences. I really want to invite people to check out the Center for Nutritional Psychology. I am a part of that nonprofit movement, which is providing education on nutritional psychology. So it goes beyond the individual and puts it into the larger context, thinking about weight stigma, diet culture, our cognitive processes around food. Of course, calorie-centric frameworks dismiss traditional eating patterns, can undermine cultural food ways that are inherently nourishing, and historically, many susceptible to calorie counting traps have been women and gender diverse people coping with social and societal body pressures. Quantitative nutrition is focused on calories, macros, fitness trackers, body weight, percent body fat, and it still dominates the space. You know, I'm pretty sure that I would be more popular online if I focused on these things. When people are talking calories, fitness, appearance, it is what a lot of people want. But to me, it feels a little bit shallow. So I've moved in the direction of qualitative nutrition, thinking about how food affects our mood, our outlook upon life, the energy that we show up with, our vibrational frequencies, relational health, and quality of life. And of course, these things are more difficult to measure, so it's hard to do research. It's hard to make the strong case. Of course, when we talk mental health, we always have to be informed by the risk for eating disorders, so messaging has to be safe, non-triggering. I avoid words like diet and focusing on weight, numbers, discouraging math-centric approaches, encouraging connection, grocery shopping, cooking, mindful eating, soulful eating, bringing spirituality onto the plate and into the kitchen, helping people assess hunger and fullness, encouraging being consistent, yet having variety, focusing on what to include, not just what to avoid, and encouraging what I like to call sanity over vanity. This is positive body image. So as I pointed to earlier, it seems like calories are a very convenient distraction by the food industry. So they have a long history of shaping public perception in order to protect their profits. Maybe you've heard of the Center for Consumer Freedom. It sounds great, doesn't it? Like consumers should be free, should be able to make their own choices, but this is a front group. These are organizations that were created by tobacco companies and soda companies that really have the message of emphasizing personal responsibility, convincing people that individual responsibility like calorie counting is the solution to diet-related disease. So it's been very effective in getting people to look at their own life rather than the larger context of society. And a lot of people love the concept of personal responsibility. I like it. I like the idea of making choices, but in public health and especially in the food environment, we have to think about the system and how people are being manipulated. Calories tend to shift the blame to consumers. The industry frames health outcomes as personal choices, ignoring the ultra-processed, hyper-palatable food environment they've engineered. The subtle message is it's not about the food, it's your lack of willpower. Just count calories. You want lower calorie options? We'll give it to you. You want a calorie counting app? We'll give it to you. This is on you. It lets companies avoid accountability for producing nutrient-poor, addictive products that hijack the brain's reward system. Calories tend to get people to focus on quantity rather than quality. If calories are all that matter, then 100 calories of soda is equal to 100 calories of salmon. If you're here and you're interested in nutrition, you probably know that that's not true. But there are people that are still stuck in a calorie-centric paradigm that see food this way. And my deepest hope for everyone that is here is that when you look at food, if you've always seen numbers and calories, maybe after today, you'll be able to start seeing nutrients that are supportive. You might see fibers and minerals and colors. There's so much more to food than calories. The calorie mindset can be a trap. Calorie erases discussion of real nutritional value, inflammation, gut health, metabolic effects, or mental health outcomes. And it allows ultra-processed food manufacturers to market low-calorie versions of junk food as healthy choices, which maintains their brand loyalty without major formulation changes. And it undermines real public health messaging. Efforts that emphasize whole foods and cultural foodways and food justice tend to always be drowned out by calorie-focused diet culture. Even well-meaning platforms like corporate wellness programs mean well, want to help their people, will adopt calorie counting as this neutral tool, and it just reinforces these industry-friendly narratives. Meanwhile, the root causes of diabetes, depression, and disordered eating, things like poverty, trauma, and the food environment, remain unaddressed. Calorie counting often leads people to focus on micromanaging their plates rather than asking the important questions. Why does food with the longest shelf life get the most shelf space? Why are real nourishing foods unaffordable for many? Why are entire aisles of supermarkets essentially addictive, nutrient-empty products? So by keeping people obsessing over the numbers, the industry distracts from the structural causes of poor health, and they're able to keep selling cheap inputs at a premium markup. So what about ultra-processed foods? This has been an area that I've done quite a bit of research in the last few years, and just want to highlight that it has a formal definition that was developed in Brazil. It has 4 categories. The first is unprocessed or minimally processed foods, if you think of the corn on the cob. Category 2 are processed culinary ingredients. These are sugar, salts, and fats, flavors, other food additives that are added to make food more palatable and to store longer. Processed foods combine Nova 1 and Nova 2, and this is most of the food we eat. If you think about the canned corn, it is a processed version of the corn on the cob. But when we talk about ultra-processed foods, we're talking about foods that contain little, if any, intact Nova 1 foods. These are foods that could generally not be created at home. They're made by a series of industrial practices that are designed to maximize profit rather than think about public health. Importantly, many forms of food processing are beneficial. Processing increases the palatability and storage of minimally processed foods, but ultra-processed foods includes substances that are not used in culinary preparation. Things like flavors, colors, sweeteners, emulsifiers, stabilizers, preservatives. All of this is completely missed by the calorie model. They're used to imitate sensory qualities of minimally processed foods, to disguise undesirable qualities of the final product, to increase their rewarding properties, to maximize profit. And this is an example of ultra-processed foods. And my point in sharing this is to emphasize that the top example is a ice cream, a typical quote-unquote binge food. If you look at the ingredients, it's not just ice cream. There's colors and there's some wheat flour in there, some crunchy stuff. It looks like a pretty exciting ice cream product. Most people think of this when you think of ultra-processed foods, but ultra-processed foods also include the low-calorie protein bar, which is at the bottom. So if you were to be a calorie mindset person, you would look at this and say, wow, it's not a lot of calories. It's got good protein, and look at all those vitamins and minerals. When a different lens would be to say, these are all mostly soy protein, different oils, corn syrup, and then vitamins that are sprinkled in. So a calorie model might say, wow, this is a good choice. Whereas a mental health model would say, this is actually inflammatory and not something that I want to consume. So when I do talk about ultra processed foods, we're not just talking about pastries, ice creams, and cakes. We're also talking about all the diet products that are on the marketplace. And in my opinion, a lot of low calorie diet products are very predatory. We're talking about low carb breads and, sugar-free jellos and fat-free salad dressings, things of that nature that really do appeal to people that are trapped in the calorie mindset. So I love getting people to move out of the calorie mindset and start thinking more qualitatively about food. The US leads the way in ultra processed foods. We are the world leader in consumption. Nearly 2/3 of the foods consumed in the US meet Nova 4 classification. These contribute to about 90% of the added refined sugars. Ultra-processed foods are inversely associated with dietary fiber and protein intake, and fiber is really important since it is the primary fuel for intestinal microbes and has been positively associated with better mental health. So when you think about the different fibers and polyphenols that are in food, these are all details that are missed by the calorie-centric framework. Research from Brazil suggested that ultra-processed foods have much less micronutrients. We're talking about things like vitamin A, most of the B vitamins, C, D, E, a lot of the different minerals. It's important to emphasize that some B vitamins are added as enrichments to ultra-processed foods. So if you've ever seen the term enriched white flour, that means that in the processing, a lot of the nutrients were lost and they were added in after. So that's why some of the B vitamins are present in ultra-processed foods. But there's a lot of people that are starting to take the position of, I don't want supplemental vitamins added to my food. I want to eat food that has the vitamins inherent to them. The other important part of food that I think is often missed is the role of antioxidant polyphenols, things like flavonoids that are in the blue purple foods and the green teas. These are very, very rich antioxidant compounds that have a wide range of implications for aging, mental health, etc. It's important to recognize that these compounds are easily destroyed during ultra processing. Some studies suggest that ultra processed foods have much lower flavonoids. And there's a synergistic interaction between polyphenols and fibers that are abundant in Nova 1 plant foods that are modulated by gut bacteria. Polyphenols are stable 6-carbon benzene rings, and they're able to donate an electron. So because of the stability of the ring, they are able to easily donate an electron, which scavenges some of the free radicals that are bouncing around, causing oxidative stress, hence the term antioxidant. A polyphenol is many phenols. They're very complex and diverse chemical structures, and these are found in colorful produce. And I guess the main point I want to make is that they're very, very sensitive. So a lot of food that has been processed or altered, you look at the calories and you don't get this full picture. It turns out that our bacteria in our guts love polyphenols. They reduce gut inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, and there's a synergy between the fiber in the food we eat and the polyphenols. So if you were to take a polyphenol supplement and a fiber supplement, it wouldn't perform as well in your body as if you ate the raspberry, okay? So I always like to remind people the active ingredient in raspberry is raspberries. There's something about the food matrix that is intact that is super beneficial for gut health and mental health. When people have low intakes of fiber and low polyphenols and high intakes of ultra-processed foods, there's documentation of elevated inflammatory markers, things like CRP, different interleukins, TNF alpha, and these elevated inflammatory markers in the context of mental health are significant. One mechanism is microbial encroachment to the gastrointestinal wall, also known as leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So when we think about mechanisms that link food to health, ultra processed foods in particular. The first is displacement. When people eat more of these foods, they tend to eat less of the minimally processed food. So, as a food positive dietitian, I really do believe that the real problem with ultra processed foods is not just in their pro inflammatory effect, but it's in the way that they teach the brain what to expect from food, particularly in the growing children, adolescents, etc. The real cost of some of these rewarding foods is that people start to reject food in its more natural state. We talked about the poor nutritional profile. There's also neoformed compounds from the high heat processes that are in the factories, things like acrylamide, advanced glycolation end products, and food additives we know can be inflammatory, things like emulsifiers, coloring agents, thickeners, etc. But also thinking about packaging, the plastic, the bisphenols, and the phthalates. We know that ultra processed food has a higher glycemic load, which reduces satiety signaling. And this is not captured by calories either. Fiber is super important. Ultra processed foods have less, so people have faster eating, decreased satiety. We talked a bit about gut dysbiosis and short chain fatty acid production. We talked a bit about intestinal permeability, and of course, the question of addiction like eating. There's a lot of controversy as well as momentum in the popular press about foods being banned, things that are allowed here in the US and restricted in the EU, things like BVO, ADA, titanium dioxide, the different reds and yellows, tartrazine. There's a lot of parabens and other compounds that are allowed in our food system that are completely uncaptured by calorie-centric models. So how do these foods affect mental health? There's links between ultra-processed foods and anxiety, but I think the overwhelming weight of the evidence suggests a dose-response risk for depression, not just foods that increase the risk of depression, but ways of eating that might decrease the risk. We have large prospective studies that show increased ultra-processed food and higher incident depression occurs over time. And I just want to state these are high quality studies that have adjusted for physical activity, sleeping hours, TV, and other potential confounders like marital and employment status. And these dose response findings often emerge as early as adolescence after adjusting for factors such as self-perceived body image and bullying victimization. So think about the youth. They learn in school about calories and they learn about macros, and they are just focused on watching their calories and they miss all of this other information. Higher ultra-processed food consumption correlates with boredom, crying, fear, worry, loneliness, unhappiness, poor sleep, and sadness. And it's worth emphasizing that having the youth be hyper-focused on calories is problematic, potentially conferring risk for eating disorders, but it's also problematic to get people overly obsessed with food quality, okay? This is known as orthorexia nervosa, and it is an important consideration when providing this education. I've decided that I'd like to provide this information and make those disclosures and disclaimers. I think that my main goal in doing research in this space is not to freak individuals out, but to really start a wider public health, public policy conversation. And that is happening currently in our world. There is a lot of talk about changing the food supply. My view is that changing the food supply is going to have a lot of positive downstream impacts on things like depression, the incidence and prevalence of eating disorders, etc. So for every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption, there's an 11% higher risk of depression. And to date, we have 7 randomized controlled trials that show depression levels significantly decrease after dietary counseling that encourages the intake of minimally processed foods. And I just want to highlight that the studies that were designed to be weight-focused were excluded from this systematic review and meta-analysis. So this is not weight loss that reduces depression. This is dietary interventions that change biology that decrease depression. So what about food addiction? Food addiction affects about 14% of the general population. It's much higher in clinical samples. These estimates, the 12 to 15% range, closely mirror the prevalence of substance use disorders. Food addiction is about 12% in children and adolescents, which is a level of addiction unprecedented among the youth. Not surprisingly, ultra processed food addiction is linked to higher consumption Nova 4 ultra processed foods. Here's where it gets interesting. We know that these foods can cause biological changes, especially in the brain, affecting the way that the reward system works. And, these pose very unique challenges for dietary change and improvement. As a practitioner who's worked with people over the last 13 years, I get people who are still hyper obsessed with portion control, weighing and measuring calories and just thinking about energy balance, and maybe sometimes overlooking how ultra processed foods contribute to hedonic processes. Some people have more addiction susceptibility, more impulsivity, more negative urgency. And I'd just like to say, given the food environment, it's not surprising that nutrition habits are challenging to change in the face of various life stressors and ongoing psychosocial adversity. So people are lost and caught in the trap of calorie counting. Ultra processed food addiction is not just an individual level problem. It has a lot of policy implications. So again, not just thinking about this in terms of people. I know that if you're here, you're interested as a person, but this conversation has value, how this impacts disadvantaged communities, policy implications, really trying to figure out how it's relevant to eating disorders, larger bodies. So when can calorie counting be helpful? If someone is an athlete and has specific performance or body composition goals, it's great. People preparing for aesthetic competitions can definitely benefit from very precise tracking. It allows for targeted manipulation of macros and meal timing and energy balance to achieve certain appearance-related goals. If someone has a metabolic condition, type 2 diabetes or PCOS or metabolic syndrome, they can use calorie tracking to manage carbohydrate intake, to understand portions, to improve insulin sensitivity. But my experience does suggest that focusing on food quality, meal timing, and glycemic load is usually more impactful long term. Calorie counting can be a great short-term educational tool. If you're learning about nutrition for the first time, you can learn about calories and improve your awareness of energy density, serving sizes, hidden sources of added sugars and fats. And when this is done briefly and mindfully, it can help demystify the food environment. Under dietitian supervision in a clinical setting, calorie tracking can be used to assess food intake for a wide range of disease management, weight restoration, etc. But in these cases, the intention is diagnostic or therapeutic rather than aesthetic or restrictive. So when can calorie counting be harmful? People that have disordered eating and eating disorders, calorie tracking can intensify obsession, increase shame, fuel restrictive or binge purge cycles. This is particularly problematic in the known clinically diagnosed eating disorders. What about people with trauma or other mental health vulnerabilities? Tracking can become a maladaptive coping mechanism, reinforcing hypercontrol or perfectionism. For individuals with PTSD or depression, it can erode self-trust and increase self-blame. Anyone that's focused on long-term sustainability, tracking calories fails to teach interoceptive awareness. It can disconnect people from the joy of eating and cultural food practices. So who's most likely to gravitate toward calorie counting? And again, these are broad strokes, and I'm just speaking from the literature and from my clinical experience. People with OCD often get a sense of control, order, and predictability, which can feel soothing. For those that have obsessive tendencies, might feel compelled to track every bite, check, recheck, experience distress if unable to log food. This mirrors common OCD behaviors like checking, counting, rigid rule following. Even in subclinical OCD, perfectionism and rigidity can drive compulsive calorie tracking. Perfectionists and high achievers, people with type A personalities, might feel the need to optimize every detail, believing that precise tracking is a form of discipline and success. This is very common in the fitness and wellness industry, where tracking is equated with being serious or committed. People with trauma histories, especially early life adversity, might use calorie tracking as a form of self-regulation in an unpredictable world. It offers a false sense of control when other parts of life feel unstable. And this is consistent with the window of tolerance model. When people are overwhelmed, some will dissociate into hyper control over food. Individuals with numerical certainty needs, those on the spectrum, certain types of engineered, mathematically inclined individuals, and those who think in systems. They often enjoy tracking because numbers are tangible, predictable, and emotionally neutral, unlike the messiness of hunger, emotions, and cravings. We talked about people with disordered eating gravitated toward calorie counting as a rigid framework that overrides hunger cues and promotes an external control over internal regulation. It replaces interoception with external metrics, especially those that already have disrupted hunger and satiety signals. When to be concerned. If you start making food choices based on calories, this can be a flag. For example, avoiding some of the most nutritious foods like avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil. Choosing foods that have calorie labels over ambiguous foods. I've had clients and patients that are at a hot bar at Whole Foods and they get nervous because they don't know the precise numbers and might choose a bar over food that doesn't have specific calorie counts on them. Not wanting to eat at restaurants that don't provide counts. 20 restaurants or more are supposed to provide calories, whereas the smaller family-owned restaurants aren't. So this can create a bias towards some of the mega corporations. If there's binge eating, conflict eating, if you're cutting calories the next day to compensate for going beyond the target, or those that treat it like an exact science. Calorie counting can be helpful as a short-term tool in specific contexts, especially when supervised. For most people, it's not a sustainable, psychologically safe strategy. It's far more effective to focus on food quality, food groups, meal patterns, mindful, soulful eating, metabolic flexibility, the gut-brain connection, accessing celebration, joy, and personal value. So I want to introduce a new framework to you. This is called value-based eating. This is an effort to help people come to terms with their personal values and how that relates to food. A randomized controlled trial among 8th graders framed healthy eating as consistent with adolescent values of autonomy and the pursuit of social justice. As I've done with you today, healthy eating was offered as a way to take a stand against the manipulative and unfair practices of the food industry, engineering junk food to make it addictive and marketing it to young children. And this intervention was more effective than traditional health education. So this is a framing intervention that is able to compete with efforts to market ultra-processed foods. It's a values alignment intervention, helping folks live up to the values that you already care about. Maybe you value convenience, and maybe getting food delivered and having it be easy is part of your value system. If that's true, honor that. Maybe you like eating with other people. Maybe you like going to restaurants. If those are part of your values, then you should honor that. But some people are starting to question the food companies and say, hey, some of these companies are predatory. They're polluting the environment. They are marketing products to vulnerable populations, and I no longer want to support them. There is a way to take a symbolic stand against these injustices. And as I start wrapping up, I want to share with you the Wise Mind Nutrition app-based program. It's an opportunity to enhance your mental well-being using nutrition. One of my taglines is to improve your brain without taxing your mind. And I have 5 components to use as a framework: when to eat, what to eat using food groups or colors, for example, thinking about how to eat, cooking, cleaning, sitting down, how to think. And my view is that when you focus on when, what, how, and how to think, the how much to eat question answers itself. And you can see there's really in-depth education about anti-inflammatory eating. This is just one of the 42 modules. There's a video. There are assignments, which are reflections on the video. There's little one-liners or gems that you can save, meditations, cooking instructions, recipes, etc. Lots of resources that get you to think beyond calories and start thinking about anti-inflammatory eating, eating for gut health, eating for mental health. I think that a lot of the app users are old users of the MyFitnessPal that did that tracking, numbers, counting, and are looking for something a little bit different. You learn about prebiotic fibers, things like artichokes and beans, etc. I just want to invite you to embrace a new framework where when you look at food, you don't see calories. I am a trained dietitian, and when I look at food, I don't see calories. I look at a Brazil nut and I see selenium. I see antioxidant activity that's going to impact my brain. I look at walnuts and I see omega-3 fatty acids. I look at pumpkin seeds and I get excited about the magnesium. I look at fermented foods and I see live bacteria. I look at nutritional yeast and I see B12 and mushrooms that have vitamin D on them. You start seeing food in a whole new light. You stop seeing it as the thing that's causing you problems and start seeing it as the thing that's going to help solve your issues. I see kiwi and I look at the skin and I think about the bacteria in my GI tract that are going to have a field day. I think about the seaweed that has unique fibers that are going to really be helpful for gut bacteria. Cacao, I drink a lot of cacao in a hot tea form in the evening, and I just feel the polyphenols and the zinc, and I feel all the nutrients rushing into my body. But I want to give you an example of how to create a meal plan that's not calorie centric. You might say there's going to be 3 meals and 1 to 2 snacks. Maybe the meal plan means that you're going to prep 1 meal at home. Maybe it's not a full cooking. Maybe it's just assembly. 1 home prepped meal per day. Trying not to go more than 4 or 5 hours between eating. In the Wise Mind Nutrition app, there is food groups and 6 categories: fruits, vegetables, grain, dairy, protein, beans, nuts, and seeds. I use these as prescriptive rather than calories. We might say, let's get all the food groups twice a day. Put the fruit at the breakfast and at the snack. Get a vegetable at lunch and dinner. Make it cooked and raw every day. Put the grains at some of the meals, maybe less so in the snacks. Let's focus on these dairy products rather than others. Let's get a protein from animals at all meals. Let's sprinkle in beans, nuts, and seeds as often as possible. Try to get 3 food groups at your meals. Try to get 2 food groups at your snacks. Have your fun foods and your desserts with other people rather than being alone. Drink 3 liters of water every day if you can. No artificially sweetened beverages, because those are not supportive gut health. Practicing mindful eating, soulful eating at least once a day. Set aside some time to eat slower and to check in with your hunger and fullness. Maybe use a mantra, play some music, and log and journal your food in the Wise Mind Nutrition app and conduct a nightly review. You could see people call me and they hit me up on the internet. They're like, I want a meal plan. And what they're saying is, I want you to calculate the calories and break down the macros and help me figure out what to eat. And I'm very convinced that is an outdated framework. It doesn't resonate with me at all. And I do not provide that service. I've never provided that service my whole career. Instead, I help people co-create guiding principles like this here so that your food approach is flexible, sustainable, and it evolves over time. There's a really cool food log you could see here as an example entry. A salad that was purchased for lunch, checking off the food groups. I ate a little too fast, so I made the note that I ate quickly, but I also feel fortunate to be able to afford this. And here you can see at the end of each day when you do a nightly review, it basically just tells you how many times you ate from each of the food groups. You can see if there's ever any under eating or overeating. And it's a really simple framework to focus on more nutritious foods. It doesn't really focus on what to avoid. It just focuses on what to eat. It's very beneficial for people that have a history of mental health challenges. You can connect with other people on the app. There's no reason that you should do it alone. And you get resources like this. Eating to optimize mental health. I like to encourage getting 30 different plants every week. I know that's a lot. Some people can get 20. If you can get 20, you're killing it. If you want to count something, count your grams of fiber. Try to get 30 grams a day. And once you learn the fiber content of a lot of different foods, stop counting them. Eating the rainbow every day. Blue-purple food, yellow-orange food, dark green food, red food. And this is super important. And most people don't think about this. The calorie model misses this completely. Getting all your sensory and tactile needs met every day. So having food that's hot, cold, crunchy, creamy, savory, sweet, chewy, etc. To remind folks that food for thought is no substitute for the real thing.